"Who let her in?" The voice sliced through the marble hall like a blade. Every servant in the Blackwood Manor held their breath, turning toward the entrance. Beneath towering archways and a cascade of crystal chandeliers, a lone figure emerged. Jasmine Carter stood still, clutching a crumpled envelope tightly to her chest. She wore a modest, worn-out dress, hair neatly tied back, and the curve of her pregnant belly could no longer be hidden beneath the thin fabric. Her eyes scanned the faces now staring at her, some curious, some judgmental, but no one spoke. They didn't have to. Their expressions said it all. "She was expelled," someone whispered. "And now she dares to return?" Jasmine said nothing. She drew a long, trembling breath, her narrow shoulders rising, then stepped up the marble staircase. In her hands, she carried nothing but a letter and a truth too heavy to deny. She wasn't there to ask for forgiveness. She didn't need a second chance. She had returned, not to beg, but to bring truth back into the room where it was once silenced. From the top of the stairs, Ethan Blackwood appeared. The man who had once cast her out without mercy now stood frozen, eyes caught somewhere between shock and dread. 6 months hadn't erased the memory of that storm-swept night. 6 months earlier, the iron gates of the Blackwood Manor creaked open, groaning like a place that had long forgotten how to welcome anyone. Jasmine Carter stood outside, shoulders burdened by a threadbare backpack, hands trembling as they gripped a stack of papers. Her face was composed, but her eyes carried a desperation that had learned how to stay silent. Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper of many years, opened the door. Her expression unreadable, her voice sharp as a blade. "You're 5 minutes late." "I'm sorry." Jasmine bowed her head. "The first bus." "Rule number 1, Whitmore cut her off, stepping past the threshold like a shadow, tall and stern. "Never explain." Jasmine fell quiet, clutching her documents to her chest. A clean conduct certificate, a letter of recommendation from the Hope Haven shelter, and a medical report confirming her virginity. A revolting requirement, but her only ticket in. Inside, the mansion was polished to perfection, so pristine it felt inhuman. Thick carpet swallowed the sound of footsteps. Jasmine followed Whitmore through halls lined with silent maids, their uniforms immaculate, their eyes colder than porcelain. "Rule number 2, Whitmore continued, voice flat. "You are never to be noticed. You are air, a piece of furniture." Jasmine nodded, lips pressed tightly. "Rule number 3, the woman paused before a narrow room at the far end of the corridor. "You are never to step inside Mr. Blackwood's study, under any circumstances." The door shut behind her and Jasmine finally exhaled. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the rapid thump of her heart. In her fingers, the silver crucifix her mother had once given her still hung. She clutched it tightly, as if anchoring herself to a world not yet lost. In that tiny room, Jasmine whispered to herself, "Not this time. I won't break. This time." The library was Jasmine's first assignment, a vast room with dark wooden walls, a ceiling that reached toward the heavens, and thousands of old books stacked in solemn silence like eternal witnesses. Jasmine moved like a shadow, the dust cloth trembling slightly in her hands as she cleaned shelf by shelf. The chime of the grandfather clock startled her, and then she felt it, a shift in the air, cold, sharp. Someone was watching her. "Who authorized your entry?" The voice came from behind, low but commanding. Jasmine turned slowly, the cloth slipping from her grasp. Ethan Blackwood stood at the threshold, tall, immaculate. A custom black suit hugged his frame like armor, but it was his eyes, amber, framed by thick lashes, burning with a steel-wrapped fire that rooted her to the floor. I was assigned the library, sir," she said quietly, eyes dropping in obedience to the rules. "Look at me." His voice was thunder and silk, resonant, deliberate, striking something deep within her spine. Jasmine raised her gaze. For a heartbeat, time faltered. Their eyes met, and something unnamed passed between them. "Your name?" Ethan stepped forward, each stride seeming to draw the very air with him. "Jasmine Carter, 18. A faint, cruel smile touched his lips. "The orphanage sent you?" Before she could answer, something slipped from his pocket. A worn photograph. Jasmine bent to retrieve it out of instinct, but froze when she saw it clearly. Ethan, younger, smiling beside a woman cradling a baby, joy in their eyes. "Don't touch that," he growled. But Jasmine's fingers had already brushed the edge. A jolt of cold shot through her. The storm struck New York City like the return of a long-forgotten curse. Thunder roared, winds howled, and rain fell in sheets, as if some forsaken god had decided to weep in fury. Jasmine Carter sat in the back of the taxi, gripping her old cell phone, left behind at the Blackwood Manor. It was her only connection to the orphanage and to Sister Jasmine, who might find records about her mother. At 11 p.m. The iron gates loomed through the downpour. Jasmine stepped out, her thin coat soaked instantly as she approached the service entrance. Mrs. Whitmore had warned her once, "If you ever use this key without just cause, don't bother coming back." But Jasmine had no other choice. Inside, the mansion was cloaked in darkness. Only a faint glow leaked from the study. She retraced her steps through the marble corridor, heading to the supply room, where her bag likely was. A crash rang out. Thunder or something else, she wasn't sure. And then the unmistakable clink of glass on glass. From the study, she hesitated, then moved. The door was ajar. Ethan stood near the window, his silhouette framed by lightning. A half-empty bottle of whiskey dangled from one hand, his white shirt stained with blood, left hand cut and dripping. "The maid who doesn't follow rules," he rasped without turning. "Looking for more photos that aren't yours?" "You're bleeding," she whispered, stepping closer. He let out a bitter laugh. "Sharp eyes, it's the anniversary of my wife's death. What would you know about loss, Jasmine?" She didn't back down. "Pain doesn't care about social class, Mr. Blackwood." He advanced. "Are you lecturing me now?" His shadow loomed like a storm. "You're just someone who's already lost everything," Jasmine said, lifting her chin. "And that's exactly why I'm not afraid of you." Silence. Then Ethan murmured, "You've never belonged to anyone, have you?" Jasmine said nothing. A small nod was answer enough. In that moment, there were no rules, no roles, just two human beings, bare, wounded, and alone. Thunder cracked above them as his mouth found hers, as if the storm itself was the only place bold enough to hold something so forbidden. 3 weeks later, the morning at the Blackwood Manor looked like any other, but Jasmine knew this day would mark an ending. Her stomach curled each morning, and today marked the third in a row. The child was growing inside her. Mrs. Whitmore entered her room, gaze sharp as ever. "Should I assume Mr. Blackwood is the father?" Jasmine wiped her mouth, steadying herself. "My personal life is none of your concern." "In this house," Whitmore snapped, "everything is my concern." Less than an hour later, Jasmine was summoned to the study. Ethan stood by the window, back turned, gripping an envelope in his hand. "How much?" he asked, voice cold as stone. "Excuse me?" Jasmine whispered. "How much for your silence and disappearance?" She froze. Not from surprise, but from the sting. "You think I came back for money? You're an orphan, poor, untouched. You appeared on the anniversary of my wife's death. Convenient, isn't it?" Jasmine let out a dry laugh, eyes damp but refusing to cry. "No, I came back because I forgot my phone. Without it, I can't reach the orphanage." Ethan didn't flinch. "This is your termination letter, along with enough money to start a new life, somewhere far away." Jasmine didn't look at the envelope. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a wrinkled letter. "I wrote this the morning after that night, before I knew about the baby, before you became this." She placed the letter on his desk, her gaze void of expectation. "You don't have to read it, but one day, you will." Jasmine walked out of the study without looking back. The letter remained on the desk, and Ethan stood frozen, saying nothing. Rain had begun to fall by the time she reached the gates. No one came to see her off. Only Mrs. Whitmore, sharp-eyed as ever, and a few scattered maids pretending to be busy, their eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. No hands reached for her. No one dared say goodbye. Only her footsteps echoed across the marble, like defiance carved in rhythm. Jasmine held her head high. No rage, no regret, only the rain, carrying her dignity away from a place that once tried to bury it. 6 months, 180 nights, and each night, Jasmine Carter still heard the thunder from that evening, the night everything ignited, began, and shattered. When she returned to the Blackwood Manor, there was no rain, but the sky was just as gray as the memory. Her hands carried nothing but one resting gently over the curve of her belly. 6 months of pregnancy, 6 months of silence. But today, she had not come to plead. She had come to remind someone of a truth he had tried to bury. The housemaids froze as she entered. Some turned away, others stared. No one spoke. Once, she had been the maid, the untouched girl who trespassed where she shouldn't. Now she returned, belly unveiled. Not hidden, but held high like a banner. I survived, and I'm not afraid anymore. She's not allowed. Mrs. Whitmore stepped forward, voice sharp as ever. Let her in, Ethan's voice called from the top of the staircase. Silence fell like a curtain. Jasmine lifted her chin. He stood tall as ever, sculpted from stone. But something cracked in his eyes when he saw her. Like a truth he'd tried to forget taking form before him. They entered the study. No one spoke. There was no need. On the desk, it waited. The letter. Still sealed. Edges yellowing, her heart ached. You never read it, did you? She asked, not accusing, only sad. Ethan looked at the letter as if it were both sacred and dangerous. His hand trembled as he lifted it. Slowly, he opened the seal and read, eyes moving across every line. Ethan, by the time you read this, I will have left. Not out of fear, but to preserve what dignity I had left after that stormy night. I don't write to demand anything. I write so you'll know that what happened between us wasn't a mistake. At least, not to me. You once asked if I had ever belonged to anyone. The answer was no, until that night. I didn't belong to you in the sense of possession, but in the way two broken people sometimes find each other in the ruins, if only for a moment. I know who I am. An orphan girl, poor, nameless, unremarkable. But that doesn't make what I felt for you cheap. It was real, and it deserves to be acknowledged. When I touched that photo of you and the woman from your past, I wasn't trespassing. I was trying to understand the pain behind your eyes, because I too carry losses I've never dared to name. I don't need you to love me, but I need you to know that honest feeling doesn't come to destroy, it comes to illuminate. If someday you find this letter and your storm has passed, read it, not with your logic, but with whatever part of you still remembers how to ache, to long, and to love. I am leaving, not because you cast me out, but because I choose not to stay where truth is denied. But I carry no resentment, only a piece of that night, when I was truly alive, if only once. That was the truth, and if you are brave enough to face truth, perhaps this could still be a beginning. Jasmine, the air in the room thickened. Ethan inhaled sharply. His hands clutched the edge of the desk. Why didn't you make me read it? He whispered. Because I didn't want to beg, Jasmine answered. Her eyes held no tears. Because people only read the truth when they're ready to be hurt by it. He stepped closer. Then, before anyone could stop it, Ethan dropped to his knees. No performance, no strategy. Just a man finally realizing that something weighed more than pride, more than control, a truth he had refused to face. He pressed his forehead against her belly. I don't deserve you, but please, don't let me keep running forever. Jasmine placed her hand on his shoulder. I didn't return to be kept, she said. I returned so you'd never forget what we both lost. 2 days after Jasmine's return, someone unexpected arrived at the Blackwood Manor. Richard Blackwood, Ethan's father, the man who had vanished from his life after his mother's death. Ethan faced him in the study, where the pale morning light cast long shadows, echoing secrets left unspoken for decades. "Why are you here?" Ethan asked, tension coiling in every word. Richard looked at his son as if he'd aged 10 more years. "To tell you something I've lacked the courage to say for 20 years. Ethan's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed. "Your mother's death," Richard paused, his voice catching. "It wasn't an accident." The air froze. "She took her own life because she discovered I had betrayed her. I was planning to marry someone else for a political alliance to save the company." Ethan stepped back as if struck. "Victoria, your wife, found out the truth. She threatened to expose everything. I ordered someone to scare her. Just a warning. But she died," Ethan said, voice like splintered steel. Richard bowed his head. "I didn't want that, but I started a chain of mistakes I couldn't stop." Silence fell. "Why now?" Ethan asked, voice low. "Because you're about to become a father," Richard replied softly. "And you need to know, if you want to break this legacy of darkness, you have to face it first." Ethan turned away, but the redness in his eyes spoke volumes. He did not forgive. But he understood now. To love rightly, sometimes you must learn from the worst. The grand hall of the Blackwood Enterprises glowed under chandeliers. Hundreds of eyes from media, shareholders, and business elites locked onto Ethan as he stepped onto the emergency press podium. In his hand was a sheet of paper, not a financial report, but Jasmine's letter, now neatly folded like a sacred testimony. "A year ago," Ethan began, his voice reverberating like thunder, "I let a woman walk out of my life. Not because she was wrong, but because I was too much of a coward to admit that truth hurts more than lies." A wave of murmurs rippled across the room, but Ethan stood tall. "Jasmine Carter, she's not just a maid. She's the first person who ever looked at me without fear, the one who loved me, not for my power, but for the man buried beneath it." A senior shareholder cut in, "Are you turning a scandal into some romantic speech?" Ethan replied, eyes cold and cutting. "I'm turning a rotting legacy into a future worth living. If I have to choose between my unborn child and the reputation you're trying to protect, I choose my child." Tension filled the air like a taut string. Then applause broke out from the last man anyone expected, Richard Blackwood, his father. "My son," he said, voice firm, "has done what I never had the courage to do. Place love above power." And then Jasmine appeared at the back of the hall. Blue dress, rounded belly, eyes shining like a lighthouse cutting through every shadow. Ethan stepped off the podium. No need for judgment, no need for forgiveness. He needed only one thing, to walk toward the woman he chose. The old chapel of the Blackwood Manor had never witnessed a wedding like this. No lavish display, no nobles or aristocrats, only those who had once witnessed pain, and now were here to witness the opposite, healing. Jasmine stood before the mirror, her hand trembling slightly as Mrs. Whitmore fastened the pearl necklace, the only jewelry left from Ethan's mother. "Do you think Elena would have accepted me?" Jasmine whispered. Mrs. Whitmore looked at her through the mirror, her voice soft for the first time. "If she were alive, I believe she would have opened the door for you that night." Music began to play. Not the usual wedding march, but a piano composition Ethan had written. A fusion of his mother's favorite melody and a new one, written just for Jasmine. Ethan stood at the altar, in a plain suit, no emblems, no symbols, just a man who had learned to love after losing everything. When Jasmine appeared at the doorway, the room held its breath. Her 7-month belly did not dim her beauty. It made every step she took a declaration of hope. The vows were not long. Ethan looked at her and said, "I used to think strength meant letting no one close, but you touched the weakest part of me and never walked away." Jasmine smiled, eyes glistening. I used to think love was a privilege for those who had everything, but you taught me it's a choice, and today, I choose you." They exchanged rings, simple, unadorned, melted from the gold of his mother's heirloom and the silver from Jasmine's childhood crucifix. A new legacy, born not from status, but from pain that had been forgiven. The first contraction came at dawn, just as sunlight spilled through the bedroom window. Jasmine lay with her head on Ethan's chest, their fingers tightly intertwined, as if time could no longer pry them apart. "It's time," she whispered, lips trembling, but her eyes steady, fearless. Ethan rushed her to the hospital, urgent but not panicked. From the moment they entered the delivery room, the world held its breath. As Jasmine screamed in labor, Ethan gripped her hand, not to control, but to carry the weight with her. He was no longer the cold-hearted businessman of a year ago. He was a father, trembling, waiting for the first cry of his daughter. And then it came. A cry. Strong, fierce, as if tearing through every silence that had ever bound the Blackwood name. Jasmine wept. Ethan wept. And when the nurse placed the baby in their arms, every apology, every regret, every loss melted away. "What will we name her?" he asked, voice thick with emotion. Jasmine looked down at their daughter, jet black hair, warm brown eyes, then turned to him and said, "Elena, after your mother, because she deserves to be remembered for something beautiful." Ethan smiled through his tears. Elena Blackwood. A tiny soul, an old name, a new meaning. And in that moment, as Jasmine cradled their daughter, and Ethan wrapped his arms around both, they were no longer the legacy of pain. They weren't rewriting the legacy, they were building a new one, not from empire, from empathy, not from might, from mercy. Time passed, the old scars faded, but instead of vanishing, they became memory, and memory became the foundation of a different kind of future. At the Blackwood Manor, the piano no longer played lonely notes. Now, it sang each late afternoon under the tiny fingers of Elena Blackwood, a little girl with her mother's eyes and her father's hands. Jasmine was no longer the orphan girl standing in the rain. Ethan was no longer the man hiding from truth. They were a family, not perfect, but honest and brave. Richard, the father who once lost everything to power, now sat quietly in the garden each morning, rereading old letters his wife once wrote, with eyes that had finally learned how to weep. And in a quiet corner of Ethan's study, the once wrinkled letter still remained, now framed in glass, a declaration of truth once ignored but never erased. If anyone asked what was the strongest thing they had ever done, the answer would not be building a corporation or winning public favor. It would be to love,